I think most people have a feeling that when their team gets too big, it becomes less efficient. But it's not always easy to articulate why, and what is too big. In this video, we're going to take a look at what happens when a team size gets too big, talk about what is too big, and then start to go into what you can do about it. So we'll start with what we're going to cover, and then if it interests you, you can stay on. If not, click away. So firstly, we're going to go into what we mean by too big. Then we're going to talk about the cost of large teams. Then we're going to look at how they can make work boring. They can discourage people from contributing. Trusts and relationships get worse. Individual contributions become less visible. Motivation goes down. Tried and tested ways of working become less feasible. And you have to do less effective ways. And then, as a result of all of this, why larger teams then require a bigger leadership effort in order to keep them ticking along. So if you're interested in a specific section, please just jump straight to it. Okay, bit of an introduction. I'm Phil Cutcliffe. I've been working to improve team performance for the last 20 years. I'm a trainer, coach, a delivery manager, whatever is required at the time. And let's start by saying, well, what do we mean by a team that's too big? So there's a lot of literature out there that generally points to, I'd say, between 3 and 9 is a good size for a team. Any less than that, you haven't really got a team. Any more than that, and the inefficiencies start to trickle in. Some guides refer to it as 6 plus or minus 3, but generally that's what we're talking about. And we're mainly talking about knowledge work. So this is work where the people doing the work have a better understanding than their manager. So it's a lot of office work. My background's in software development, but funnily enough, it ends up applying to actually quite a lot of things where you're bringing people together to build or do any specific task. One of the easiest ways I think you can try and convince your senior leaders that team size shouldn't get too big is to look at cost per meeting. So fairly simple on this. The cost of a meeting, bringing the team together, goes up exponentially with the number of people in that team. So the formula I got is the time required per person times the number of people squared. So a really simple example, let's say you have a daily meeting, everyone comes together, talks about what they're going to do for the day, does a bit of planning, resolves any issues. Let's say that meeting happens every day, takes 1 minute per person. If you have a team of 14, each person talks for 1 minute, that meeting lasts for 14 minutes. But that meeting costs 14 minutes for 14 people. So that meeting costs 196 minutes of company time. Whereas a meeting of 7 only lasts 7 minutes and only costs 7 minutes of 7 people's time. That's 49 minutes. That's a quarter. Even if you got 2 teams of 7 versus one of 14, that's still half the amount of time spent in meetings. So the cost of bringing the team together to meet, collaborate, goes up exponentially with the number of people in the team. So bold statement, but for me, one of the biggest reasons why it's not great to have a team get too big is it becomes boring. So imagine, reoccurring example here, a team of 14 versus a team of 7. If you have a team of 7, you're working with 6 other people, when you talk about work, you're all likely to be working on the same thing, more or less. You're all pushing in the same direction. Hearing about what 6 other people are working for, it's interesting. You can get behind it. As a team starts getting bigger, and you start to go from 7 to 14, suddenly you're listening to 13 other people describe what they do. You're not going to care. You're not going to care about what everyone else in that team is doing. Perhaps it doesn't affect you at all. Well, what does that mean when if you're not really interested? Well, meetings become less interesting. The interactions become a bit boring. And we've all been there on those Teams calls where you see the cameras start to go off. You see people's attention start to look at their second screen or down at their phone. To get the disengagement. So to keep engagement high, keep energy levels up, it's much better to have a small team where everyone can actually care about what all the work is. Okay, another big top tip for not having your teams too big. And if you've been watching the series, you'll probably recognise, I'm using the same pictures here. But meetings, when they get too big, they get intimidating. So it's one thing to be able to present to a group of 6. Maybe you've got a small team. You think you're doing some planning, maybe you're reflecting on how things went. To talk in front of a group of 6, it's just a whole level easier than talking to a group of 14. So, you've got all these connections, and a lot of people don't want to. They don't, they're not happy talking in large groups, presenting to large groups. If you're getting feedback from your customer, imagine inviting a customer to a presentation or a demo. You've got a little team, 6 sitting around a table or sitting on a call. It's much, much easier. If suddenly they're loading up the teams and they've got all these faces looking at them, or just lots and lots of names, it can generate a different response. A lot of people don't like it, and it will change what they say and how they interact with the group. Have you ever worked with a group of people, maybe a sports team or a school project or a team at work, where everybody had a deep understanding of what everybody's strengths were, what work was required, what needed to be happening, and you trusted each other. You trusted each other to have each other's back if something went wrong. You knew what each other's strengths were, and if someone was struggling, you'd pick it up. And generally, as a team, you had a really high-performing, high-trust, high-understanding team. Well, that's so much easier with a small team. And it's one of the things we see in the workplace, that when you have teams get bigger and bigger and bigger, that trust, that deep level understanding of what everybody's capable of, and that feeling of having each other's back starts to disappear. It's just another reason to keep that team size down. So here's a reason for keeping a team small that might not be very popular, is that individual contributions are less visible in a larger team. So let's take 2 extreme examples. Imagine a team of 6. You're working in a team of 6, and someone, for whatever reason, isn't really contributing. Maybe they're new, maybe they don't understand, maybe they're focused on other things outside the team. In a team of 6, everyone can see it. You're all pushing in the same direction. If someone isn't able to contribute as much as you'd like, it becomes quite obvious quite quickly, and you can do something about it, whatever that thing might be. Now triple that team size. Imagine a team of 18. And I've seen this. You get sometimes individuals within that team who aren't really working with many other people in the team, and there's so much going on in this team that you can't always tell that they're not contributing. So you can't help them, or you can't deal with the problem. So as team size comes down, it becomes more and more obvious what everybody's doing, versus as team size goes up, it becomes possible not to notice when things aren't going as well as they should. So the most motivated teams I've seen, with the most excited individuals to be working on what they're working on, are small teams. And this is one of those things that's really hard to prove and get the data on, but in my experience across hundreds of teams, the most motivated teams are small teams. And I think it's part of being a big cog in a small machine versus a small cog in a big machine. You know, in a small team, that what you do makes a really big difference. If you don't show up, if you don't commit, if you don't really deliver, the thing's not going to be successful. Where, if you're one of 14, 20, 25, is it really going to be noticed if you don't fully show up? And it's not to say there's unmotivated people in big teams, but in general, on average, I see much more enthusiasm and motivation. The smaller the team, the more motivated the people. In general. Let me know if you disagree in the comments. So the number one reason why you don't want your teams to get too big is actually the tried and tested ways of working start to break down. So what do we mean by this? Well, let's look at a really simple example of what happens when your meetings get too big. So, example we had earlier was, let's imagine a meeting just takes 1 minute per person. You have 14 people in that meeting. That meeting is going to be 14 minutes long. It's going to cost a lot because you're using those 14 people for 14 minutes, but the meeting is going to be 14 minutes long. Well, what happens if actually you're planning the next week's work? You don't need 1 minute per person, you need 10. Well, now the 14-person meeting is 140 minutes long, and the 7-person meeting is 70 minutes long. So immediately you can see if you're going to schedule meetings, plan the next week's work, maybe 2 weeks' work, it's a heck of a lot easier to schedule a 70-minute meeting. So you bring those people together for just over an hour. They can plan what they're doing. You can probably get all your stakeholders, your customers in, and have a really good session. But as you're starting to get bigger and bigger, this is knocking on for 2.5 hours. People don't like coming to 2.5 hour meetings to plan their work. So what happens? Well, you start to say, okay, maybe we'll cut it down to 5 minutes a person. There you go. You've got 5 minutes to plan your work for the next 2 weeks. Now that doesn't work. It's not long enough. So then you need maybe some follow-up sessions because this is a bit awkward. Or maybe you're not one of those people that likes talking in front of 14 people to try and plan your work. Maybe that's not the best use of everyone's time. So you sit there and just kind of grin and bear the meeting, and then you get to the other side and say, okay, I don't know what to do. You just try and get by for the next 2 weeks, not really having been able to plan your work properly. It's probably, or is it follow-up sessions? Or do people just, not turn up, and then you're missing key inputs because some people haven't turned up? Or do you give up on this whole format? Who on earth wants to sit through a 2.5 hour planning meeting every 2 weeks? I know what we'll do is we'll just write it all down and send it to them in an email, and our workers can just work off that. So then you start to grade the forms of communication, using lower levels, less efficient ways of communication. And this is just the planning meeting. A whole load of other ways of interacting, swarming on tasks becomes harder, getting feedback from people becomes harder, the logistics becomes harder, trying to get that many people to meet and connect and be at the right time. All of these things start to stack up. And what we will see is if the team size starts to swell, you'll end up with more meetings, longer meetings. People will have less understanding of what's going on. They're more likely to get distracted. They're less likely to engage. And all of the structures that, if you look at lean and agile, Scrum, to name just a few, they're rather focused on certain things happening in certain ways. And if you start to break that, so you have to do things in other ways, simply because the formats become very unpalatable as you get a large team, that's where the biggest impact hits. So I spent a while talking about why teams should be smaller, don't let them get too big. But I think it's worth touching on some of the reasons why teams do get too big, so we can start to address it. So first one I see quite a lot, is to build the product that they're building, it needs a lot of specialist skills. So I work in software, so an example of this might be a product that requires most of the work to be built in Java, but then let's say there's some specialist skills that you need in there as well. Maybe you need a database guy, maybe you need some special back-end connections that requires another specialist. Oh no, now you need a user design specialist. Now you need maybe there's an integration to another system. You need an API specialist. And suddenly, as you start to build up the team, say, no, I require these 5 specialists alongside my 5 Java developers. Therefore, I need at least a team of 10. Oh, no, I've got a team of 10. I need an extra analyst. And now I need a dedicated Scrum Master, because that's a lot of people to organise and lead. The answer to this is, in a perfect world, when you're looking at your architecture, what's your system made of? Try and keep it simple, so you need fewer specialists. And I know that's very easy to say now. Usually it's already too late by the time I've seen teams. But that's the ideal. Design your team in such a way that, don't design your architecture in such a way that you don't need lots of specialist skills. However, if it's already too late, then think about cross-training. Is it possible that you can train some of those skills so you don't need specialists, you can have more generalists? Can you borrow people for fixed amounts of time? So let's say you do have to integrate with another system. Can you bring someone who's a specialist in that for a period of time, get them doing the work, training others, and then they can roll off, so your team size isn't permanently too large and causing inefficiency issues. There's a bunch of things you can do there. Another reason I see teams get too big is very short-term thinking. So maybe there's a deadline looming, and the team knows that it's already too big. Maybe it's hit 14 people, and they know they need to split it to 2 teams of 7. But they know that will be really disruptive, and there's a bunch of work required to do that, and they just can't take the short-term hit for long-term productivity, so they stay too large. And maybe that's the right thing to do, right? Maybe you're designing an advent calendar. Maybe that's your product, and it's nearly Christmas, so you couldn't lose any short-term productivity at all. And then another reason that I see is, and this one's actually perfectly legitimate, is individuals in a team aren't so much a team but a collection of individuals. Maybe they don't need to work so much. So an example of that might be a sales team or a support team where people are working independently. They don't need to pair up. They're not, if they don't do their bit, someone else doesn't fall over and fail to sell whatever it is they're selling. They can come together for team meetings that are going to be quick and efficient, and it doesn't matter that it's a big team. Most of this video is focused on on genuine teams where people are reliant on each other to do the work. It's not work they can just do by themselves. And then finally, to kind of wrap up, we talked a lot about not letting teams get too big. So what's the answer? Well, we keep teams small. So a good size is between 3 and 9 people. You look at some of the guides, they say 6 plus or minus 3. It's actually the same thing. In short, usually when you're starting to surpass 10 people, that's when it gets too big. And 10's a good number because that splits nicely into 2 teams of 5, which hopefully means in a team of 5 you've got all the skills you need to actually build what it is you're going to build. That's the size. What can you do? Well, we talked a bit about cross-training people, so you don't need so many specialists. You might encourage people to wear more than one hat. So, for example, again, sticking to software, you might have more people doing testing than would otherwise be testers. Do you really need to hire 2, 3 testers? When there's not always work for 3 testers, perhaps you can get some of the rest of the team doing the testing as well to keep the size down, improve the architecture. And then finally, maybe consider more senior people. So one way to increase speed, it's all very easy to say, I know, but one way to increase speed is to have more senior people. So perhaps if you had plans to hire 3 graduates and that was going to take your team size from 9 to 12, actually, would it be better just to hire a senior dev who probably costs the same as 3 graduates and bring your team size to 10, which is still a little bit big, but far more manageable, and that might be a better, more efficient way of going faster if you've got the budget for it. That wraps up this session. I'm Phil Cutcliffe from Ad Agility. If you like this, please follow for more.